How does a 4000 series Nvidia GPU in a laptop for 1200 quid sound? It sounds pretty good to me. That's exactly what's on offer in the new G5 2023 edition of the Gigabyte G5 gaming laptop. DLSS 3 in a laptop for this sort of money sounds almost too good to be true, and I want to know if it is too good to be true. Let's have a look at this thing and see just how it performs. Hi guys, I'm Matt and welcome to Kit Guru and to my review of the 2023 revision of the Gigabyte G5 gaming laptop. Today I'll be checking out the KF model, putting it through its paces in a variety of games and different workloads. The retail price on the G5 KF 2023 version is 1,198 quid, and for that sort of money you're going to get the following specs: a 12th gen Intel Core i5 12500H processor with 4 P cores, 8 E cores. And then you get the star of the show, an Nvidia RTX 4060 GPU with 8GB of GDDR6 memory, a Gen 4 512GB PCI Express M.2 SSD. You get 16GB of DDR4 3200 memory, a 144Hz 1920 by 1080 display, and all of this is housed inside a slim and pretty light overall build of the G5, tipping the scales at 1.9 kilograms. Now let's run through those parts in a bit more detail and just discuss them a little bit. Obviously, to be able to offer the latest generation of graphics hardware for this sort of price, then compromises have to be made somewhere along the way. The CPU is the first one that jumped out to me, and this is by no means a massive issue in my opinion. The 12th gen i5 in this machine is still a very, very capable CPU. I'll show you in more detail just how capable it is later in the video when we get stuck into some benchmarks. Now, the clear and obvious selling point on this machine is the fact that you're getting the latest Nvidia graphics technology and access to DLSS 3 and the magic frame generation that brings with it. This is a pretty big deal for a laptop that costs 1200 quid, and the RTX 4060 found in the G5, coupled with the 1080 display, sounds like a great pairing on paper. Again, we're going to make that GPU sweat a little bit later on in the video. The SSD included in the G5 from the get-go is a rather small 500GB, and in my personal opinion, that just isn't enough in today's day and age. With newer released games regularly taking up to close to 100GB nowadays, you'll run out of storage pretty quickly. Not to fear though, as there is space for another drive. There's another M.2 slot, which is pretty easy to install and it's pretty easy to access. But seeing a 1TB drive as standard would have been a nice touch in my opinion. They're not that much more expensive. I'd rather charge 1,220 quid for it and stick a bigger drive in from the get-go. As for RAM then, you're going to get 16GB of DDR4 memory running at 3200 MHz. And that's more than enough for gaming at 1080p on this machine. There are 2 DIMM slots in this model, which are both occupied by an 8GB memory stick or memory module. So the option of increasing is there if you want to go down that route, but it would mean completely replacing the existing RAM as both the current slots are occupied. But that's besides the point. Right now, I feel that the 16GB is more than enough for the product of this price, and especially given the fact that you're going to game at 1080p on it. And the display then, the display is a 15.6-inch 1920 by 1080 144Hz panel, and it looks great in my opinion. I feel that Gigabyte going with that 1080p panel is the perfect choice for this laptop. Not only does it keep the cost down for consumers and keep this laptop at that 1200 quid, it's a great choice for pairing with that 4060 GPU, which should enable it to smash through games at 1080p. It's kind of the sweet spot. 4060 or the 60 series cards and 1080p gaming have always gone pretty well together. The battery on offer from Gigabyte is 54 watt hours, and I did test it. We'll look at it later in the video in a bit more detail, but yeah, it's 54 watt hours, so you should get a bit of use out of it. Before we move on to the benchmarks then, I just want to talk about the design and the build quality of the G5. This is a thin and pretty lightweight laptop, and I wouldn't have any issues taking this machine on the road and lugging it about in a bag for a few days. The side and top bezels are nice and thin, which gives it a modern and clean look, even with there being a bit of a chin on the bottom. It's like some mobile phones are designed like that. That chin sticks out a bit, but it's nothing major. The keyboard is fully backlit for those extra gamer vibes, but the keyboard itself is nothing special. It just feels like your run-of-the-mill, mushy laptop keyboard. The speakers are okay, again, nothing to write home about. They're situated on the underside of the front corners, and I will mention that they work much better when the laptop is on a desk and the sound has a hard surface to reflect off. There isn't much bass and the highs are quite tinny, and I'll drop a sound test in a moment, you can take a listen to it, but they didn't blow me away, but they'll get the job done. Here's that sound test and let us know what you think in the comments. The trackpad then. The trackpad is a decent size. It's not too big, but it's not too small. It measures 12 by 7.5 centimeters. It does feel all right, but it does have a little bit of play towards the bottom end. It's finished with a cyberpunk-esque sort of styling containing the word gaming, just in case you get stuck doing work and need a reminder to jump back into clicking some heads. Overall, I quite like the design of this laptop. It's slim, it's pretty lightweight, and it's nice and clean looking. For the money that you're going to hand over if you pick one of these up, I'm more than happy with how it looks. It isn't too gamery. In terms of I/O then, and on the left-hand side of the G5, you're going to get two USB Type-A ports. One is a 3.2 Gen 1, and then the other one is just a USB 2, which was kind of disappointing to see. And then you get microphone and audio combo jacks. Then on the right-hand side, you're going to get a network cable connection for connecting up wired if you want to decrease the lag that comes with wireless gaming sometimes. You get a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, and then you get a micro SD card reader. Then finally, on the back, flipping it around, you get another USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port. You get HDMI and mini DisplayPort 1.4 outputs, and then you obviously get the power input for the charger. Build quality is an area that always kind of, not concerns me, but I just pay attention to when you're going to get something for a good price, as it's one of the ways that brands can save money on manufacturing and then they'll just hope you won't notice. Now the chassis of the G5 is made entirely of plastic, which does help keep that weight down, but it does feel like a cheap laptop. But it is a cheap laptop, so I can't moan really. I just have to point out that it's not exactly the most robust feeling of laptops that I've ever felt. The fit and finish is good though, and the bottom panel comes off and goes back on with ease. All of the screws line up great, and the gaps where the different chassis parts meet are all uniform and they all fit well together when you put it back on. The bottom line is, you get what you pay for. People are going to be attracted to this laptop for the performance, so let's get to testing. Now quickly, before we dive in, I just want to give quite a bit of credit to Gigabyte. The only piece of extra software that I can see installed on this laptop, other than the usual Windows gumph, is the Gigabyte Control Center for controlling the fans and the power and stuff. There's no bloatware at all, something which I really appreciated seeing. The Control Center software has 4 settings: performance, entertainment, power saving, and then a quiet setting. We're going to be sticking to the performance setting for the gaming benchmarks, obviously, but I will show you the difference that the power saving mode makes to Cinebench performance too. And lastly, before we dive in, I just want to mention I haven't made any optimizations to Windows or NVIDIA control panel or anything like that. This is the out-of-box experience because I wanted to show what it would be like for someone that picks one up that may not know how to do that stuff. So all I've done is installed games and testing software and then recorded all the scores and stuff you're going to see. Let's begin the testing by looking at the typical laptop gaming trade-off. You want more performance, which is possible by activating Gigabyte's rather aggressive performance mode, which will let the CPU guzzle down more power to increase the clock speeds. But with that extra performance comes extra heat. And then of course, that heat means more noise from the cooling. It's a fine balance of having enough of one without too much of the other. I'm going to focus on the performance and entertainment profiles for these tests, as you wouldn't realistically use either the power saving or the quiet modes when trying to game or do anything especially taxing on the system. That performance mode sets the PL1 power limits to 90 watts and the PL2 power limit to a hefty 125 watts, letting the CPU use more power to really sweat it out during sustained workloads. Switching to entertainment mode drops those limits to 65 watts and 115 watts respectively, which in turn will keep the power a bit more in check and then in turn from that kick out less heat. And you can see that in the following charts. I ran several of the benchmarks in both profiles to see the differences. First up then is power usage, and we can see those power limits in action that I just mentioned. So a Cinebench multi-core run in performance mode used maximum of 95 watts with a sustained 75 watts. That 95 watts is the limit of this CPU. And then if you drop that down into entertainment mode, that drops down to 45 watts usage. Whereas Cyberpunk, obviously you've got a bit more wattage from the rest of the system, the GPU and stuff like that. That was 51 watts. And then at idle in performance mode, it was sipping, I say sipping, it was kind of guzzling 33 watts of power in performance mode. So we can see performance mode as opposed to entertainment mode. Performance mode is a real power hungry profile. Now for the temperatures in performance mode, and you can see from the Cinebench multi-core and the Cyberpunk 2077 results, they're 100 and 102 degrees respectively. That's going to lead to some thermal throttling, so you're going to get decreased performance, which the cooling just kind of couldn't keep up with the amount of heat that this laptop was kicking out. And then in idle, we got a temperature reading of 47 degrees, and that was in performance mode again, with just the laptop sitting on my desk for a while. And like I mentioned, the noise level is kind of that final pillar that you get from increasing the performance by feeding the CPU more power. This is with the fan profile all set to auto within Gigabyte software. So we got readings of 58.9 decibels within a Cinebench multi-core run, 62.6 decibels in Cyberpunk, that's because the GPU fan started spinning up, and then 35.7 decibels at idle. That increase in heat and noise though isn't all for nothing. You do get some quite noticeable performance gains in the benchmarks, at least, when you choose to run in that performance profile. We can see this in Cinebench single core. The entertainment profile clocked in at 1,551 points, but then bumping that up to performance profile, that jumped up to 1,638 points. And that continued through into the multi-core benchmark scores, with the 45 watt entertainment profile clocking in a score of 11,021 points. And then that jumped up by 2,300 roughly points in performance profile mode with a score of 13,338. So we're kind of halfway through the benchmark conclusion then, and if you can stand the noise and the heat, then stick this laptop in its performance profile or performance mode if you're going to be working on intensive tasks or gaming. Now, all of the following benchmarks from now on were all recorded with the laptop in its performance mode. First, looking at the 3D Mark benchmark results, and this laptop clocked in a score of 9,184 points on the GPU and 10,824 points on the CPU. Moving into PC Mark 10 results then, and we can see that this laptop clocked in results of 6,903 for content creation, 9,564 for productivity, 10,294 for the essentials, and then a 6,300 overall score. This was the average over 3 different benchmarks. So you can see this laptop isn't going to set the world on fire. Well, maybe it will if you run it in performance mode for too long, but it's got enough grunt to get most things that you want done. Moving into Blender then, and this is the classroom render test, and this took just 452 seconds to complete, which was a really impressive result, to be fair, for the i5, 12th gen i5 that you find in it. You don't always need the latest and greatest to get good performance. And the Ada memory benchmark results, this is a test of RAM read and write speed. We got 47,289 read speed, and then a 46,659 write speed. And finally, before we move on to the gaming benchmarks, the battery, the 54 watt hour battery scored a really poor 177 minute runtime in the PC Mark 10 Modern Office battery benchmark. That was while in performance profile. So if you're looking to get the most performance out of the G5, then you're definitely going to want to take the charger with you and keep it plugged in. Moving on to gaming performance then, and it kind of goes without saying, but I'll mention it again, all of the following FPS readings were recorded with the G5 having its performance profile active. Kicking things off with Hogwarts Legacy then, which is one of the DLSS 3 frame generation available or compatible games that are tested. And we can see that at 1080p without any DLSS, it had a 56.9 average, which is below 60. I never like to see that. Activating that DLSS 3 though gave us a 33% increase up to 75.5. So you can really see the gains you're going to get from having this latest NVIDIA technology. 75s, that's quite the jump up in performance. And that's further compounded when we look at Cyberpunk 2077 with a 62.9 average at 1080p without DLSS 3, and then a massive 77% increase with that frame generation turned on to 111.1 average FPS at 1080p. And that's with the settings pretty high. This is an impressive figure, and DLSS 3, if you can stand how it looks, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, is really, really useful for getting some gains. Shadow of the Tomb Raider then, and we can see there was an 89.81% low and 115.7 average FPS figure. Total War Warhammer at 1080p again. Obviously all the games are at 1080p, but the 1% low figure of 54.9 and the average FPS of 72.8 are quite respectable for a game that can be quite demanding. The Witcher 3 then, another game that supports DLSS 3 frame generation, and the 1080p figure without any DLSS was 40.2 average, quite disappointing. And then turning that DLSS 3 takes you up above that magic 60 FPS, and you get an average of 61.1, which is a 52% increase, which is really quite decent again. F1 2022, another title that supports DLSS 3 frame generation. Now this had a healthy 70 average at 1080p, but the 94.8 average, especially for a racing game with DLSS 3, which is a 35% increase, will feel much nicer and smoother, which is something that's really important in a racing game. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 then, and we can see the average FPS here of 81.4, and this is on the highest settings, which that's more than playable. Assassin's Creed Valhalla, another similar story to Call of Duty, 87.6 average with a 56.71% low. Battlefield 2042, one of my favourite games at the minute. It's totally done a U-turn. It's really good. If you haven't played it, you should check it out, but that's besides the point. The average FPS at 1080p Ultra is 75.6. And finally, Company of Heroes 3, a game which I really enjoy and one that I like to include because it's a little bit different and not everyone includes it. 114.1 average FPS at 1080p, more than playable, over 100 FPS for 1200 quid, very decent. And finally then a couple of slides just to look at the averages. Across the 10 game average without any DLSS or frame generation, you're going to get an average of 77.8 FPS and then a 52.1% low, which is really more than playable. The gains that you get with DLSS 3 though, with that frame generation, can't be ignored though. This is an average of just the titles that support that frame generation. Without it, you're looking at 57.5 average FPS, and then with it, that jumps up to 85.6, which takes it above. Everyone mentions 60 FPS all the time. Takes it up to 85, which is on ultra settings, all of the highest settings, and that's really quite remarkable in a 1200 quid laptop. This laptop performs really well, and I was impressed with its gaming performance. Now, just still sticking on that topic, I've mentioned it a few times now, and you saw from the results just now that DLSS 3 is a feature that you have access to with the latest generation of NVIDIA graphics cards. It's a frame generation technology that uses AI to generate and stitch in frames to your gameplay. It makes quite the difference, as we saw, to frame rate, but it's only so good looking at a number on a chart. Here's some side-by-side comparisons of the visual difference when using it. To my eyes, I can't see much of a difference, and the differences that are there are not big enough for me to care. Those extra free frames will make gameplay feel smoother. In my book, it's a win-win. Not everyone likes it and not everyone agrees with it, but I don't pay enough attention to detail and smearing and blurring. If it runs smoother and it runs faster, I'm happy. When I say free frames, however, that's not entirely true. They come at the cost of some additional input delay, which is more noticeable when playing a game that requires fast and precise inputs, such as fighting in The Witcher or hitting a hairpin in like F1 2022. It's not that noticeable to me, but it is there, and it's something to bear in mind when you turn DLSS 3 on in a game that supports it. If you're really sensitive to that input delay and you're quite a competitive gamer, you will notice it, so it's something to bear in mind. Overall then, for 1200 quid, this is a great laptop. It's designed well, it performs well, it looks great, and it's priced so competitively. Getting access to the latest AI magic from Nvidia in a decent branded gaming laptop for 1200 quid is a pretty good move. Sure, some corners have been cut in places to keep the cost down, namely the build quality and the CPU, but that 12th gen i5 is still a great performer for everyday use and gaming, and the G5 doesn't feel any worse than any other low to mid spec gaming laptop that I've ever got on my hands on. Again, I would love to have seen a bigger SSD as standard, as 500GB just isn't enough in today's day and age, but that's a minor thing that you can address down the road if you want to. The bottom line is, this is a 3rd gen RTX laptop for 1200 quid with some of the latest gaming tech available, and it works well. There's not a lot more you can ask for at this price point. I really enjoyed checking this thing out. Anyway guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like down below if you did. Don't forget to subscribe to Kit Guru to keep up with the latest PC gaming news and reviews. I've been Matt. This has been the 2023 Gigabyte G5 laptop. I almost forgot the links. Go down into the video's description to check out links to the merch store, our Discord server, our website and our Patreon page if you want to check any of that out. Anyway guys, this has been the laptop. I've been Matt. I'll speak to you in the next one. Catch you later.